and we should be live. Welcome everyone. I'm just gonna give it a minute until I can see that you are indeed in the chat. We are live from London. It is nearly 9 p.m. UK time on the 1st of December 2024. So if it's no longer the 1st of December for you, you're probably watching a replay in the next few days. If you happen to be watching the replay tomorrow or next week or whenever that might be, if you want to skip the hellos, if you want to go straight into the walking tour, you can skip the next 10 minutes. We'll just be here saying hello to people in the chat for 10 minutes. So you're more than welcome to skip that if you were watching the replay. If you are with me live, then I'm afraid you have to stick with us. Perfect, thank you Tish. And welcome Lethargy. I've chosen a bad spot again because the background is white, so it's hard to read. But hey ho. Bonjour Emily. And welcome everyone that just joined. Hi Michelle, nice to see you here. And welcome Caroline. Hi Shaz. So we've got about 10 minutes to start. We're just waiting for everyone to connect. And if any of you were watching this on replay in the next few days, if you were wondering how to join the live, if you always end up watching the replays, hi Bronwyn, hi Julie, the best way to catch the live as they are live is to subscribe to the channel and to hit the little notify me bell so you'll get a notification when I go live. Hi Laurie, welcome Emily. Who did I miss? I think I've missed someone. I've seen you Julie, I think, yeah. So yeah, just make sure that you are indeed subscribed. I need to move because I don't see anything because this way is better. Hi Marilyn. And welcome Natasha, nice to see you here. So we've got, let me check. Oops. I don't know what I've done. I think I've just done a massive zoom in. There we go. 8 minutes to go. Thanks, Natasha. And even if you know that you are indeed subscribed, you might want to double check that you still are, because sometimes YouTube unsubscribe people for no reasons. Well, they must have a reason, but they don't let us know. And welcome, Joanne. Hi, Michaela, nice to see you here. So we've got about 7 minutes to go. We're just waiting for everyone to connect. I'm here in a quiet street, but you'll see in a moment we'll join the Christmas fun. There are a lot of people around. They've probably just left Winter Wonderland and stuff. What did Natasha say? I've missed something. Seven minutes to go. Let me give you a glimpse of the view. I'll just flip this camera around. So I'm in one of those little streets full of former stables. Yes, Emily, I'll do the Christmas tour the week of the 16th. I'm going away on the 18th anyway, so it'll probably be the 16th or the 17th. And I think we'll do pretty much the same route as last year, but some of the Christmas lights have changed. So that'd be cool. Hi down. You love a muse? Well, we'll see a few today. And we'll actually talk about one of those coachmen that used to work and live in those mews. see how long we've got. 6 minutes to go. What did I miss, Natasha? Why are people congratulating you? I think I've missed one line. Sometimes you miss one line and then you miss everything. You see a lot of those very short immatriculation plates around here. I think you've got to pay for those. I think it's actually very expensive to have a short one. I don't know how much though. But people do have money here. Oh, she got a job. Okay. Well, congratulations, Natasha. I hope you enjoy it. And welcome everyone that just joined. I've just seen the numbers going up slightly. So nice to have you along. We've got about 5 minutes to go. We're just waiting for everyone to connect. So again, anyone watching on replay in the next few days or weeks, you can still skip 5 minutes. In daycare. Oh, you've been unemployed 6 months. Well, good for you. Good too. So you can go back into working life. Do you guys know where I am, by the way? Which area? Well, you can probably remember from the last time we did this tour, but well, actually, I'm in a different spot that I was last time. Well, we've done this. We've done Annie's story once in Windsor, because she also lived in Windsor, but we are not in Windsor today. We are very much in London. But where? This is the question. Last time we did it here, we actually started by the military barracks, right on the edge of Hyde Park. But it's a bit dark there, and because it's Winter Wonderland, I don't want to go too close to Hyde Park, because you'd have masses of Winter Wonderland people. News always look nice, yes. Well, this one is not the best because you don't have those all little cobbles. I'll show you a few that are even cuter in a moment. You can remember what you did yesterday. Well, last time we did this tour, we did it in Knightsbridge. We're heading towards Knightsbridge, but we're not quite there yet. Chapmanville. We should rebrand. I agree. We should rebrand. We should call it after Annie. Oh, sorry to hear that, Natasha. Well, at least you've got something. They might later on raise the salary, hopefully. You'd like to see Winter Wonderland? I wouldn't be able to do a live. The signal is so very bad. I used to work there. Even not that long ago. I was already streaming on Hego when I was working there. I used to work as a photographer on the ice rink. But even at work myself, I didn't have any signal for anything in the afternoon because it's just too busy. And to be honest, early morning, it doesn't look that great anyway. I suppose I could do a video, but you know, there wouldn't be much to say apart from like, this is a ride, those are donuts, those are French fries, this is a ride, this is a cocktail, you know. Because it's quite nice to visit to get the Christmas atmosphere, but really don't know how much I would have to tell you. Right, let's see what time it is. 1 minute to go, guys, 1 minute. Tish, I suspect when you have a foreign phone, you get the best of the signal. So, because you then change from one supplier to another, if that makes sense. So usually, for example, if I go to France, my phone is gonna swap between Orange, SFR, Bouygues. So I'll get He's won the Big Teddy at Winter Wonderland. So basically, my understanding is that when abroad you get a better signal. So Kelsey probably did have a decent one. I probably wouldn't. No, I'm not near Hanbury Street. It's a bit nicer than that. Well, nicer, a little bit more expensive, maybe not nicer as you'd call it. Right, let me see. It is officially 9 o'clock. I can hear some bells in the background. So welcome everyone. Welcome to Belgravia. That is where we are. Let me flip this camera around and let me show you where I am. So I decided to start here because I wanted to show you a little bit more Christmas lights before to get to Knightsbridge, but also because there's a very interesting building here. This is a lovely little pub called the Nag's Head. It was built for the all those coachmen that were located here, so they would have a place to go for a drink. But across the street from the Nag's Head, there's a very interesting building. Let me show you. The neighbor is going to listen to me. She probably knows exactly what I'm talking about anyway. Do you guys know this little home? There's a very famous photograph that was taken from right up here. And, well, you know what? I'll let you guess. So there's a very famous photograph, or infamous, that was taken right up here. Let me know in the chat if you know what photograph I'm talking about. If not, I'll give you a few clues. So we are in Belgravia, so you've got some very expensive homes around here. The lady that used to own that place, her dad, his name was Rob, he had a very mysterious death. He either fell down in the sea from his own yacht, urinating. He was in the habit of urinating out of the window of his yacht. So he drowned in around Tenerife. That very Rob, he was actually arrested because he was caught shaving and driving at the same time. It doesn't sound that bad, but he was actually driving 90 miles an hour and shaving his face. Exactly, Tish. Well done. You're good. That is the very home where Ghislaine Maxwell used to live. So let me show you the photograph I'm talking about. That was quick, Tish. I didn't expect it to be that quick. So yeah, that very famous photograph that I bet most of you have seen in the press was taken from, well, allegedly taken from the first floor of that little home. Maxwell sold it for 1.75 millions because she needed money to pay for the court case and everything. But yes, I'm sure most of you have seen the photo. So this is, of course, Prince Andrew with, what's her name? Virginia Roberts, I think. Jeffrey now, she married. So this is the very, very famous photo that everyone has seen. And of course, Andrew claims that it was not taken here, that it's a fake photo. In the Newsnight interview, he very famously said, I don't, it looks like that photograph was taken upstairs, and I've never been upstairs. Well, Andrew, if you've never been upstairs, how do you know that the photograph was taken upstairs? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. That interview was, of course, a bit of a car crash, really. Let me remove the photo. So, of course, Maxwell doesn't live there anymore. She's very much in prison. Still claiming her innocence, by the way. I've seen an interview of her from prison where her brother was trying to help her claim her innocence, but she doesn't sound very convincing if you ask me. And that he doesnn't sweat. Yes, Natasha, absolutely. That interview, I think it's just gold, you know, that's why they did two recent movies about it, because it's just gold. Right, let me turn down here to show you the Christmas lights. Andrew wasn't at Pizza Express that night. Well, I mean, I don't think the man goes to Pizza Express very often, to be honest. And even if he doesn't remember, quite frankly, you could ask Eugenie. I'm sure she remembers exactly. So, you know, interesting. So yeah, lovely little Christmas lights here. So we're just meters away from Hyde Park, really. Technically, we're still in Belgravia, but soon we'll head into Knightsbridge. So I wanted to start here so you get a bit more of an idea of how fancy is the area for a lady like Annie Chapman, that is often thought to be extremely poor. She actually ended up in poverty, but she was at some point almost middle class. And she's the only one out of the 5 victims that really did not need to end up on the streets of Whitechapel. You love the movie about that interview, Linda. Which one did you see? I didn't see the Amazon one. I only saw the one on Netflix, the one that is 1 episode. I need to see the other one, really. Anyway, there have been a few horrible murders around here. There was one a little bit further down this way that was the first, the very first execution, public execution out of Queen Victoria's reign. So that was in 1837. Quite a shocking murder. It was a servant that grabbed another servant. He was trying to get a bit of honky-ponky under the staircase. She refused him, and he killed her. He was quite young, but he was hanged anyway, because at that time they didn't really mind. He was only 21 years old. William Merchant, his name was. And down this street here, not sure which building, but probably one of the lovely homes we'll see in a moment, there was another horrendous murder. Another servant. That one was, that was just horrible. He used the fact that his master was away. So the master was away, so the servant was alone in the building. His name was Walkers. He then called one of those, those messenger boys. In the UK, they were, I think they were hired by the post office over here. So they were those little boys that will come and collect a message. I say boys, teenagers really. They'll be any age between 11 and 18. They'll come and collect a message to have it sent for a telegram or maybe sent straight to someone sometimes. So the messenger boy came, and Walters kidnapped him, brought it down into the basement, and he attached his wrist and everything, and he very, very badly abused him. It's one of those buildings, but I don't know which one. And then he decided to take both of their lives with gas. The little messenger boy died, but Walkers actually survived. He was 17 years old. So luckily for him, that was in 1922. So luckily for him, he was spared. He was too young. In 22, he was too young to hang, because he was only 17. So he was jailed but not hanged. But quite a horrible story, really. So despite the fanciness of Belgravia, they have a few murder stories. I shouldn't tell you too much, because next year we might do a dark tale of Belgravia at some point. This way I could tell you about Lord Lucan and all that. Anyway, let's get a bit closer to Hyde Park, so you'll see a little glimpse of the rides of Winter Wonderland. So for the ones that don't know, Winter Wonderland, it's a Christmas event every year, about 6 weeks, in the middle of Hyde Park. It used to be free, but they've used COVID to have it ticketed. But even when you have to buy a ticket, you get the money back with the rides. So you basically, if you pay £5, it's gonna be taken off of your first ride. So you can see if you see the rides straight in the distance there, that's Winter Wonderland. It's always the same rides every year. I didn't even get any free rides. Well, sometimes I did at the end of the season, but otherwise I'll have to pay like anybody else. And it gets really, really busy. To leave the park when we were closing at night, it was always a nightmare to just leave. That's why I parked my bicycle on the other side, because I'll be going down this way. I don't want to cycle next to Winter Wonderland because it's busy with a lot of very drunk people. I don't even know how people get so drunk in there because the alcohol is very expensive in there. But yeah. So yeah, you can see a bit of let me go on the streets. You can see a bit of a big wheel as well. So those are all the rides from Winter Wonderland. Anyway, let's get down to, you see the teddy bears? Winter Wonderland. That's what you can win. So when you come to London in December, if you see those huge teddy bears, they're all coming from Winter Wonderland. Oh yeah, the Netflix one is called The Scoop. The Amazon one, I don't remember what it's called. Yeah, the Scoop was very good. Hi Mary, nice to see you here. Anyway, let's talk about Annie. So Hyde Park. So Hyde Park is right behind those beautiful buildings, by the way. It was a place where a lot of young girls would come to flirt with the soldiers, because you have the military barracks just like 100 yards this way, where you have all the horse guards. So that was always a place where young girls and young men would come flirting. And one of those soldiers was actually Annie's dad. His name was George Chapman. He had left his birthplace of Lincolnshire to move to London to join the army and to work as a King's Guard at the time, because when he started in the army, he was actually guarding William IV. He actually worked through the funerals of William IV, and then he worked, of course, protecting Queen Victoria. He was one of the troopers, the King's lifeguards. They are. This is a hotel, by the way. I think it's the Mandarin Hotel. So beautiful decos. Ooh, I see. I don't want to show you too many kids, but a lot of teddies. So Winter Wonderland again. Look at the deco over here. So yeah, he came to work protecting the Queen. Let me show you what the lifeguards look like today. So those are the lifeguards. So you see them when you go towards Whitehall. You've seen them in some of my tours. So that's what Annie's dad used to do when he met a young girl called Ruth. They started dating. We don't really know much about Ruth, Annie's mum. She came from Sussex, but we don't really know much about her. And dating a soldier was quite a risky business, really, because they were not allowed to marry. Only very few of them in the regiment would be allowed to marry. So, of course, Ruth fairly quickly found herself pregnant with our little Annie. And that was a big risk because, of course, George was very much affectionate with Ruth, but he couldn't marry until the army would let him do it. And because he was in the army, he could have been appointed abroad, So if that happened, she would have found herself a fallen woman, And of course, falling pregnant, she would have lost her job into service anyway, because she used to work as a servant, but you couldn't stay and work in the family if you were pregnant. So she would have lost her job, and then she was very lucky because George was not sent abroad, and eventually, after 2 years, he got permission to marry her. And not only did he get permission, but the army accepted to backdate the marriage, the certificate. So if anyone inquired, they had married 2 years earlier, so little Annie was not illegitimate. So that was very lucky for Ruth, because Nightmare Before Christmas, I don't know what the decos were all about. It might just be their Halloween decos that are still there, I don't know. So Ruth was very lucky, because if George had been sent abroad, she probably would have stuck to the regiment. Usually those girls would then find another man in the regiment to take care of them, but then they'll become what they call dolly mops. They were like unofficial prostitutes. The dynamic between men and women at the time was so unfair that she would have been almost naturally gone into a career of prostitution. So she was fairly lucky. And then once they were married, she was allowed to live in the barracks as well. Let me try to cross. I shouldn't do this, but let's go. Yeah, it's green now. So she was allowed to live in the barracks. There was no space for privacy, though. She'd have to be dressing and undressing with all those men, and she had to do a bit of laundry, a bit of sewing or fixing any of their uniforms, and eventually the family started to grow, so they were allowed to find a little lodging in the area. Now, this area was, of course, already in Victorian times very expensive, but you had a couple of streets that were actually slums. They were very populated, overly populated, because it was the families of the soldiers. So from one street to the next, it'll be a complete opposite. And one of those little streets was Raphael Street. So that's where we're heading to now. It doesn't look anything like it would have looked at the time, but at the time it would have been a lot of little Victorian dwellings with, for example, in the classic Victorian homes with 6 bedrooms, you'd have 3 families living inside. So you often had a full family of the military living in 1 or 2 bedrooms into a home. So you had a lot of people sleeping very close together, a lot of kids, and of course we are sadly at the time of a lot of epidemics, because of those little Victorian buildings that sometimes didn't have many windows because of the window tax, and even when you do have a window, when you have 7 people living into 1 bedroom, bacteria, of course, go very quick from one to the next. And of course, sadly, we are before the age of antibiotics. Anyway, this is the street. So this is Raphael Street. That's where Annie came to live with her mum and dad, but not only, because the family had got much bigger. You had little George, little Emily, little Eli, little Miriam, and little William. So they now had 6 children living here. And that's when, sadly, an epidemic started. There's an epidemic of scarlatina, or scarlet fever, that started in Islington, and that very quickly came to Knightsbridge. In the newspaper, though, they said, don't worry. It's very much into the working classes. Sadly, of course, our little Annie was very much part of the working classes. there's a baby Miriam that died first. She was only a toddler, and very quickly after, little William died as well. And then little Eli also contracted scarlet fever. So in a space of 2 weeks, they had already lost 3 children. I mean, it's so hard to imagine today, I got. And eventually, the bigger boy, George, that was, I think he was 11 years old at the time, he also started coughing. The family called a doctor. They would wait for the last minute before to call the doctors because, you know, they were not free. The kids had been lucky that get an education thanks to the army. So Annie and her siblings were quite well educated compared to people of that class, but they'd still have to pay for the doctors and stuff. So eventually the doctor was called, when the little Eli died, George couldn't go because he was actually stuck in bed. The doctor said it was not scarlatina, it was typhus. Typhus used to spread a lot in between. They called it the camp fever, you know, people sleeping all together in a tiny space. And then George died as well. So in the space of 3 weeks, the family lost 4 kids. I mean, today we couldn't even imagine how that could happen, apart from maybe a car crash or a plane crash, but vaccines, and it just doesn't happen anymore. So it's really hard to imagine the trauma that the full family would have experienced. Somehow, though, they managed to move forward. They had another little girl, Georgina, then another one, little Miriam Ruth, and then a last little boy, Fontaine. And for the next few years, the family was moving. The army would dictate where they go. They lived in 12 different places between here in Knightsbridge and Windsor, of course, because the horse guards are, of course, also guarding the Queen at Windsor. Now let's take a look at Harrods. So those are, of course, the Christmas deco. Harrods is always lit up, though. So when you come any time of the year, you'd have some interesting lights. But those are, of course, thank you, particularly interesting because it is Christmas. So Harrods, of course, very famous department store. It would have already been here at the time of Annie Chapman, but at the time it was a tiny little shop. And it actually burned down, so it was rebuilt in the late 1880s and rebuilt much, much bigger. And today it belongs to Qatar, the country. Because Mohammed Al Fayed, the previous owner, he famously said, I get offers from Qatar, I get offers from everywhere, but I'm not selling it. I give them the finger because I'm not Sainsbury's, I'm not M&S. And 10 years later, he sold it to Qatar anyway. Mohammed Al Fayed, of course, doesn't have the best reputation anymore. Thanks to the BBC documentary that exposed him. I have to confess, I am a little bit suspicious about that documentary. I'm not saying it's not true. I mean, the man was probably a horrible abuser, but the timing is interesting. I mean, what a coincidence. That was right after the Hugh Edward scandal. So there was another abuser at the BBC. And boom, about 6 or 7 days later, whatever time it was, you got this documentary coming out exposing Mohammed Al Fayed, like a distraction, let's say. I mean, personally, I'm wondering if maybe the BBC had the documentary ready for years and they were just waiting for a time when they need a distraction to make us forget about Hugh Edwards. But anyway, that's probably just me being a bit of a conspiracy theorist. Let me show you another view of Harrods. So beautiful, beautiful department store. There was a little teddy bear that was bought inside. You may have heard of him. It's actually a similar story with Paddington. You know, Paddington that was bought at Selfridges. Well, here there was a writer called A.A. Milnes. He picked up a little bear, and apparently with his children he was actually making the bear speak, and that gave him the idea for Winnie the Pooh. So quite a similar story with the Paddington creation. Anyway, let's get back. Let's get back to Annie. So they moved. The family moved between here and Windsor, and eventually George decided to leave the army. He decided to take a job as a valet for one of his army commander. So that was a very different job. A valet was some kind of a servant. They'll shave their employer, they'll dress their employers, they'll follow them around. You know, the first one actually went to Paris, so George had to follow. Money was good. I mean, to be honest, he could hardly have done better for his family. Then he changed employer and he became a valet for another guy called Leyland. The job of a valet, though, you had a little bit more time. A lot of time to read or to wait for your employers to come back from wherever they went, and a lot of time to think. There were probably quite a few subjects that George did not wish to ponder, like the death of his 4 children. Edward VII, so that's quite an old one. So yes, sadly, one day he actually followed his employer Leyland to some kind of a horse race in Wales, and he was staying in a hotel, like a pub, the Elephant and Castle. And that morning he had to go to work at the race, you know, with his employer. The landlady woke him up. She was like, "Hey, you ready for breakfast, George?" And he's like, yeah, I'm coming down, I'm not sleeping. And an hour later, he's still not down. So the landlady went back up to his bedroom. She pushed the door. It was a butchery. You had blood everywhere. Very sadly, George had taken his own life. He had slit his throat. There was a quick inquest, but they very quickly concluded that he had acted under insanity, because at the time, you know, suicide was a crime, so they had to say he was insane for a moment. So they concluded very quickly, because they wanted, of course, the race to go on in the afternoon. So sadly, that's how tragically Annie lost her dad. Now, whilst we're here, there's an estate agent here, so let's take a quick look at the properties. So Ennismore Gardens will go right next to this one, nearly 4 million, but that's a freehold, so at least you buy it forever. 10 million over here. This is not here though. This is up towards Notting Hill and stuff. What else have we got? That's a freehold as well. How many bedrooms? Is it just 2? So yeah, over 3 million. So I don't think I'll be buying over here anytime soon. Those ones, I think it's just 1 bedroom. But yeah, over 1 million for a 1 bedroom. So maybe not for me. Well, unless you dramatically increase your tips, but not for yet, I guess. Right, let me cross over. Oops, I'm gonna go down here. So we are going into Cheval Place. Cheval, do we know what that means? You would get a huge mansion up now. Yeah, for 4 million, you'd get a big one outside of London. So do we know what cheval means? It's quite easy because it's like chivalric, really. It is horse in French. Yes, exactly, Gia, exactly, Emily. It's because I'm guessing it's because we had a lot of stables over here. Let me show you another one of those little mews. It's amazing to imagine that we're just meters away from hustling and bustling Knightsbridge, and yet you can find those little accommodations in a very, very private little street with no traffic, no noise, apart from silly YouTubers that come and shout out of your windows. But yeah, quite a cool place to live. Right, let's go back down on Cheval Street. So yeah, Annie lost her dad in very tragic circumstances. The last little boy, Fontaine, was only 2 years old at the time. And Annie was 15. So that's the age when young girls used to very often go into service. So she was lucky. She had a good education. She could read and everything. And she ended up going to work into a home on Duke Street. We've been to Duke Street together. Remember when I did the Bond Street on the Monopoly? We went to Duke Street. She worked as a maid of all work. So that was basically a servant that would do a little bit of everything, really. And she worked only 3 doors down from another architect. So her boss was an architect. But there's another one that lived there that you might have heard of. Isambard Kingdom Brunel. So she probably would have met him. You know, she probably would have even served tea to him on a few occasions. And even if she didn't, she probably would recognize him. You know. Let me go down this way. So she was already 1 foot up into high society, really. Let me see what Kurt says. Legend has it that there was a quarrel between 2 knights who plummeted under... Oh yeah, you're talking about the name Knightsbridge. Yes, there are a couple of potential stories on how the name Knightsbridge came along. And it's one of them. Although apparently, technically, it means Bridge of the Young Men. So the knight stories are only potential explanations. I'm actually, oh yeah. I forgot which way I was going. I'm going down this way. So she moved, she lived into service, but her mother was surprisingly doing okay. You know, losing your husband, losing all the income of the family, that could have brought the full family into the workhouse, really. And surprisingly, it did not. We don't really know why. There's a strong possibility that Leyland, the employer, probably felt quite guilty, and oh, let me see what Kurt says. Oh, it's a different Duke Street. Okay, interesting. So that's not the one we visited then. Anyway, so when Ruth got potentially, we don't know for sure, but when she got a bit of money from Leyland, she took the lease on this home here at 29 Montpellier Place. So she was able to take the lease on the full home, and she started to rent. It is. I'm confused. I'm confused now. What do you mean it is, Kurt? You're saying it's not the same street, right? Anyway, it doesn't matter. So yeah, so she took the lease over here, and she was then able to rent accommodations to some young men. A lot of them would have worked in the area, and you had a lot of coachmen in the area, of course. There's a young man that came to visit the place. Yeah, okay, yeah, I got you, Kurt. Yeah, I got you. And so the one young man came along, George Chapman. So George was actually called the same last name as Ruth. Ruth was Ruth Chapman, and that could have played a part. You know, that's quite fun to find someone with your name. So he took a bedroom over here, and that's probably how he met Annie. We don't know whether Annie was living there at that very point. She probably was still into service, but she would have obviously visited her mother every so often. Probably not too often, because you know those girls into service, they didn't have that much time for themselves. You know, they'll have a bit of time on a Sunday to go to church, but they didn't have that many days off, or maybe once or twice a month. This little landmark, by the way, this little gate, it's called Hole in the Wall, because there used to be a wall. Well, we still have a wall, because you had two different landowners here. So people that lived on the other side of the wall, to go down to Harrods, for example, they'll have to go all the way up to Hyde Park and all the way around. So they were quite annoyed. And eventually, through the Second World War, the wall was bombed. So they had a rite of passage. There was a little gap over here. And after the war, they wanted to rebuild the wall, but people complained. They did petitions and stuff. So eventually they did the little hole in the wall. So that's why people can walk past today. And I'm glad, because otherwise I would have had to go all the way around. Now, back to Annie. So she met George. I'd absolutely love to tell you that it was love at first sight. I'm afraid we don't know that. You know, Annie at that point was 27 years old. For Victorian standards, it's very old, and I mean, in terms of an age to find a husband and not be left on the shelves. So did she really have? Did she really fall in love, or did she not want to miss an opportunity to marry? We don't know. But the couple got married. I'll show you where in a moment. And I think one of the homes we've seen in the estate agent was on this muse. This one, or maybe this one here. So yeah, 3 million if you want a little home here. And the young couple, of course, decided to live together, and at that point, George got a job in Windsor for an aristocrat that was quite big in Portugal, but that was trying to get a name over here in the UK. He was called Francis Barry. And he decided to live right next to the Queen in Windsor. So he took a villa called St. Leonard's Hill that was very close to the Ascot racing courses, because he wanted to be friend with Edward VII, the Prince of Wales, and Princess Alexandra. And so George taking that job was, of course, a great opportunity, you know, to go up the echelons of society. I mean, he could hardly have done better for himself. Being a coachman was already quite a decent job. You know, it was much better than being, for example, a hackney cab, those taxi, horse and carriages on the streets. You know, those guys had the reputation to be drunk all the time. To be a private coachman was already quite good, but to work in Windsor, right next to the Queen, that was a big step for the family. The couple was photographed. Let me show you. So this is this is Annie and John Chapman. We're very lucky to have a photo. She's the only victim that we actually have a photograph of out of the 5. It was retrieved by a ripologist called Neil Sheldon. He was able to trace some of the descendants of the 5 victims, and he's actually met Annie's great-granddaughter. So he was able to find this photograph. So it's amazing to see what she would have looked like. I know they're not smiling. This is because, down. But this is because at the time you'd have to remember that photography was a very long exposure. So you'd have to stay still for a while. So, it's very hard to smile for a minute and a half. So it's actually much easier to have quite a straight face. Now, the couple had some kids. The first one was Emily Ruth. Let me show you her photo. There she is. Then they had the little Annie Georgina. Let me show you Annie Georgina. There she is. And then there was a last one called John Alfred. We don't have a photo of him. And Linda is asking, those big wooden doors, are they garages? Well, because they were former stables, that would have been back in the days for the horses. Today, most of them are not actually garages. Most of them have their living rooms behind it, but you might still have a few garage, because those accommodations are not that big. So some of them have actually done a normal room behind it. Anyway, so here are the girls. So just the fact that they were able to pay for a photograph really shows that they were almost middle class. The girls would have been given the opportunity to get a good education in Windsor. They lived in a little cottage on the ground of the St. Leonard's property, so just very close to Ascot and to Windsor Castle and all that, and that could have been it. That could have been their stories. The girls could have got to marry middle class boys and they could have had a great life if Annie had not been an alcoholic. Now, I've just told you they had 3 kids. They actually had 8, but sadly 5 of them lost their lives very quickly after being born. And apparently, even on the photographs I've showed you, apparently you can see something with their lips. They suffered from alcohol fetal syndrome. And Annie would have known. At the time, they were starting to realize the impact of drinking alcohol through pregnancies. So Annie was probably aware that the reason why she lost 5 of her children was her drinking. And I didn't tell you, but the little boy, John Alfred, was actually physically disabled, also probably because of Annie's drinking. And Emily Ruth, at the age of 8, she started to show some seizures, also potentially due to Annie's drinking. So it'll be easy to judge Annie, but I think, the shame and the stigma of people judging her, and just the knowledge to have known that the death of her children were probably her own fault, her own drinking, that probably pushed her even closer to the bottle. And Francis Tresbarry, of course, was a man trying to get into the upper echelons of high society. Edward VII would have come and visited, through the Ascot week. He did not want to have a drunk on his property, So that's how the family decided to send Annie to some kind of a retreat in Feltham. he decided to send her into like a rehab center. At the time, they would have called it an asylum, but it was more like a rehab today. She was signed up for a year to try to become a teetotaler. Her sisters were actually teetotalers. And she came back home. She was cured. She didn't drink anymore, so they could start a new life, finally. And apparently she managed to stay sober for a few months until one day her husband, John, had a bit of a cold. You know, at the time they used alcohol for everything. Alcohol was into medicines, you know, even for the kids. You know, you had a cold, you'd have a shot, you know. And that very morning, apparently, to find the courage to go and work in the cold, John had a shot of hot whiskey. That story might have been exaggerated by Annie's sisters because they were famously teetotalers. But apparently, he had a shot of hot whiskey. The bottle was probably very well hidden. You know, he knew he was married to an alcoholic. But then he kissed her goodbye before to go to work. And it is said that the fumes of the... Yes, exactly, Tish. There was a lot of cocaine and laudanum and very addictive stuff in the medicine at the time. Yeah. The Victorian pharmacy was full of poisons and drugs, like drugs. Anyway, so allegedly, because of the fumes of the alcohol on his lips, Annie started to have this horrible craving. She looked for the bottle everywhere, and then she ran to the pubs, and then she became drunk again. So this is where they married. So this is it was All Saint Church. Now it is actually a Russian Orthodox church, but this is where the couple married. Now, poor little Annie fell back into alcohol. She was known to the police. She was known to everyone in town. I didn't realize this. I think there's a homeless gentleman sleeping here, so I'm gonna move out a bit. I don't want to wake him up. Eventually, you know, she was drunk all the time. Our little girl, the biggest girl, Emily Ruth, she developed a cold. Annie probably would have gone ballistic because, of course, she would remember the symptoms of scarlet fever with her siblings. It was not actually scarlet fever. It was a different bacteria. But poor little Emily Ruth, 12 years old, died. When she died, actually, Annie was not there. She was out, probably at the pub or somewhere getting drunk. So it's difficult to imagine really how horrible Annie would have felt. And at that point, Francis Tresbarry decided to kick Annie out of his property. So John probably had a very challenging decision to make. Kick Annie away, separate, or leave, but you know, the man had 2 kids to take care of. One was physically disabled. He had to have this position. He had to, you know, put his family first. So he decided to separate with Annie. He gave her a pension, so she had, I think, 10 shillings a week or something. That would have been enough to find herself a little lodging and survive. She was going every week to collect the money at the post office. He was probably hoping that she'd go back to her mother, and she did for a while. But the thing is, her mother and the sisters were teetotalers, and they couldn't put up with Annie drinking. And eventually, like many alcoholics or many addicts in general, Annie chose the substance instead of her loved ones. So she left her mother, and that's how she ended up semi-homeless. She, at the time, she was doing almost okay because she had some money from John. She ended up in Notting Hill, where she met a guy called Jack Seavey. Together, they took a little lodging in Dorset Street. You might remember Dorset Street. We've been there when we went to Whitechapel, of course, when we did the Jack the Ripper tour. The most dangerous street in London, although it only became the most dangerous street in London in the 1890s. So at the time when Annie was there, it didn't have that reputation quite yet. And eventually the money stopped. She didn't get her pension anymore from the post office, so she decided to walk. She walked all the way back to Windsor to see John, to see what was happening. And he didn't live at the same place anymore, so she went to the pub, the Merry Wives of Windsor, to inquire about John. The pub owner remembers her. He said she looked like a tramp. And he said to her that John had been unwell and he had moved, he had lost his position. She probably was on time to see him before he passed. We don't know what was said. She came back to London, and that's when she became even worse. She never really recovered. She started to drink even more. Jack CV left her, probably because she didn't have the money anymore. We don't quite know. She did find herself another boyfriend. There was more like a weekend boyfriend. The guy was working during the week, but they'll be together in lodging houses on a weekend. His name was Edward Stanley. And she potentially started to sell her body, but we don't know that for sure. Actually, there are a few. I've never seen her with any other man than Stanley, and Stanley was actually quite jealous. That's when she started to wear 2 little fake rings. It wasn't really a gift from Stanley, but it was to give herself the appearance of a married woman. So did she maybe sell her body to Stanley was paying for her to have a night in a lodging house on a weekend, but on a Tuesday morning, she'd be on the streets again. She did work. She was doing little crochet, and she was trying to sell it in Stratford Market and stuff, but really she might have had to resort to that trade to pay for her lodging and to pay for the drinks. We don't really know. What we do know is that even there was a girl, Eliza, with who she fought over a bar of soap. Even that girl didn't mention that she ever sold her body. She said she never even saw Annie with any other man. So she was very quickly branded as a prostitute, but we just don't know that for sure. Now, the rest of the story, you know it, because we talked about it through my Jack the Ripper tour. She was penniless one day. She already suffered from tuberculosis anyway, so she probably would have died fairly quickly. And the lodging house was like, no, you get some money for your beard, but not for your night. You go. And she was like, keep my bed for me. I'll be back. She wasn't back. She was found about 6 in the morning in the little courtyard at 29 Hanbury Street. There had been a couple of witnesses that night, but those witnesses are actually contradicting one another. There was a lady called Elizabeth Long that claims that she saw Annie at 5:30, precisely 5:30 a.m. on the street right in front of number 29 Hanbury Street. She was talking to a gentleman. The gentleman said, "Will you?" And Annie said, "Yes." The gentleman, she didn't see him clearly, but it was dark, she said. And she was convinced it was Annie because she saw her at the mortuary. She said it was the same lady. Now, we should be careful with the eyewitnesses. We should always be careful, because sometimes people have good intentions, but they actually are wrong. There's another witness, his name is Kadosh. He was the neighbor, and he claims that he went down to his back garden for a pee at 5:20. 5:20 precisely, because he woke up at 5:15. And he heard someone said no. He didn't know if it was a man or a lady, but someone said no in the back garden next door at number 29. And then he heard like someone being pushed against the barrier, you know, the wall. And he's quite precise about the timing as well. Now, if she was on the street, or if she was in the back garden at 5:20, how can she be on the street at 5:30 meeting the men? Like it, you know. Well, one of those testimonies is wrong. Unless they had been in the back garden, she refused to do something, he pushed her, and then they went back on the street, he offered something else, she then said yes and went back into the back garden. But there's, you know, it's just a bit complicated, so we don't really know what happened that day. We don't even know if any of those testimonies are correct. We know she was not yet in the back garden at 4:50 because one of the tenants had gone outside to feed the rabbits or whatever, sat there, so he would have noticed the body. But did she go in there with a customer? Or did she go in there just to have a bit of a rest? Because, you know, they couldn't sleep on the pavement. They were kicked away from the police. Thanks ever so much, Linda. That's very much appreciated. So the story of her being a sex worker, taking a customer into the back garden, it could be true, but probably not. It might just be Annie that went sleeping rough into the back garden, and then was interrupted by a killer. If that was the case, the man did not need to be that strong if he targeted ladies that were sleeping. You know, they have been labeled prostitutes because at the time the police always imagined that every single lady outside on the streets at this time was a prostitute. But really, in the case of Annie Chapman, there's no evidence of that. Maybe, but we just don't know. By the way, for most of what I've told you today, I'm very much indebted to Hallie Rubenthal. She's the researcher and the author of the Five. She's done a great amount of research on the victims. Anyway, I just came down this way because the military barracks are on this side. There's not much to see at night, but just to show you where George would have worked. Now let's go back to the quiet place to finish the tour. Annie, by the way, she does have descendants. She's got some family in Texas, I guess. Poor little Fontaine, her little brother, he also was an alcoholic. He's one of the only ones that actually saw her in the last few weeks of her life, probably to give her a few drinks. And he couldn't cope after her passing. He actually deserted his family, and then he gave himself up at the police station. He had to do 3 months of hard labor, and then he took his family to Texas to start a new life. So she's got some family there, and little Annie Georgina, the second daughter. Let me show you her photo. Where is she? There she is. So her second daughter, would you believe she lived until the 50s? So she had some children. Unfortunately, it looks like Annie's kids were not made aware of what happened to their mom. Well, unfortunately, I don't know, it might be, it depends how you see things. But so Georgina's daughter, so the last surviving grandchildren of any of the Ripper victims, she actually died in 2008. So that's amazing to imagine that her granddaughter was still around that long. The Chapman descendants, they don't really want to be publicly interviewed or anything, but they are now aware of their sad inheritance, really. And they live in South London. So Annie Georgina's kids, they are in somewhere in South London. We don't really know where. You feel sorry for Annie? Yeah. Well, it's, addiction is a very difficult thing to deal with, because even as a friend or a family, there's only so much you can do, and you can understand the frustration of the family as well, So you'd have to feel sorry for her, because really, I don't think any of us now can imagine the trauma of losing 4 siblings in 3 weeks, and then realizing that all you kids are suffering because of you and your fondness for the bottle. Shame is such a horrible feeling. It's one of the worst feelings you can have. So, it's easy to understand how she could have stuck to the bottle, So it's, and really, we don't know anything about Annie. With all the facts I've told you, it's what researchers have been able to find, but it's only wedding dates or census or name of the kids. Really, we don't know much about any of those ladies and their personalities and what they liked and what they feared, and so we can judge them, or we can have some sympathy for them, but really we don't know anything about them, or very, very few little facts. Anyway, that's going to be the end of the tour. Let me know in the chat if you have any questions for me before we go. If you want to see a bit more of me, on Thursday we're heading to Kingston. The forecast is looking horrible, and I'm not exactly ready with my research, but we'll make it happen. Let me know in the chat if you have any questions. With the corgis. I don't even know who Ava Gardner is, Kurt. Who is she? Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, Dawn. If any of you dropped me a little tip on PayPal or on Buy Me a Coffee, that's very, very much appreciated. Yes, Laurie, I'll be doing the Christmas light tour. I'll schedule it soon. I've already done the thumbnail. I need to schedule it probably about the 15 or 16 of December. Oh, an actress, okay. That's probably why I don't know her. My knowledge of actors and actresses are actually quite bad. There was an actress that lived right next to where we started as well. She was a mistress of Edward VII. Thanks, Pauline. That's very, very kind of you. Thanks, Mark. Cool. Thank you for coming, guys. It's always a pleasure to have you along. Kingston on Thursday. The week after, we'll go back towards Soho to show you the Christmas lights on Carnaby Street and all that. So that'll be about plague, cholera, and Christmas lights. And the week after, so it's not scheduled yet, but yeah, we'll redo the Christmas tour. If I can find the snow, yeah, I think I've got the video. I could upload it on a private link if you wanted to rewatch it. Yeah, I think I should have downloaded it, so I should be able to do that. Yeah, that was the snow day when I got targeted with snowballs as well and all that. But yeah, I'll look that up. I probably still have it somewhere, so I can probably upload it. Yeah. Cool. Thanks, Mitzi. Thanks, Kurt. Thanks, Tish. Thanks, Lethargy. I'll see you soon. Have a great evening or a great morning, whatever time it is for you, wherever you are in the world. And bye. Thanks, Tish.